Okay. I want to get into this. I've been really thinking about this past week. Let's see. So my favorite podcast, probably, yeah, definitely my favorite one is the Joe Budden Podcast. And they're in a interesting situation because they're trying to find their value within the podcast world. So the Joe Budden Podcast is a podcast that's exclusively on Spotify. They signed a 2-year deal 2 years ago at this time, and like their contract is trying to re-up their contract, but they're going to leave because they feel like they're not getting their worth. They're the number one podcast on Spotify, number one. So I've been listening to their last couple episodes, and it's very intriguing. As someone that is very very watchful of the podcast world right now, I'm like an overcast looker going on right now in the podcast world, just because it's such a brand new item. And so this situation, the Joe Budden Podcast is a podcast. They're a music podcast. They talk about rap, hip hop, but at the same time, they talk about personal stuff. They talk about situations with women or just problems, and these are like, it's like four guys like in their 30s, and it's kind of fun for me to listen to because I'm in my 20s, and it's just kind of like there's just kind of, what do you call it, like a barbershop type of feel to it, or just like a mature as a mature aspect worldview of someone like in their 30s. And I'm not gonna call them mentors. That's just kind of cheesy, but like just like what do you call it? Just some older, not guidance, but just older, just comments on the world, especially in pop culture. And so, yeah, it's a music podcast, but there's some times where they just don't talk about music at all. I always compare it to the caller, I think Call Her Daddy or Call Me Daddy, Call Her Daddy, I think, podcast. But I think it's like I always say it's like the Call Her Daddy podcast, but it's less sexual, very less sexual. Or Call Her Daddy is this. No. I mean, I'm not stereotyping. Let me stop. I would say it's the Joe Budden Podcast is like the Call Her Daddy podcast, but a tad bit less sexual and situation like that. Okay, so the Joe Budden Podcast is leaving, and they announced it this past week, and there's been a lot of comments about how they signed a bad deal. Oh, why aren't they re-upping their deal? Oh, they should get all their money's worth. And I think they're just going to go back to YouTube, and they're just going to see who wants them, like exclusively, Spotify, Tidal, Apple. I have a prediction that I feel like they're going to go to Tidal, just because it's very, what's it called? Very black influential. I think because like Jay-Z and Diddy are not Diddy. Jay-Z is kind of heavily involved with Tidal. And Joe Budden Podcast is like very, I guess, more into like the black culture and stuff. Whatever. So they're the number one podcast in the world. And so now I don't know about, we'll see when Joe Rogan comes on to Spotify here soon, tomorrow actually, or today if someone listening. But I remember a couple months ago when Joe Rogan signed that $100 million deal with Spotify. And I was like, wow, this is starting now. That was the domino that was like, oh, money was announced. Like I never heard about how much, Joe Budden was making or Call Her Daddy was making. Like this was like this multi-year contract with $100 million. And I was like, wow, there's an actual tangible aspect toward a podcast. And I was like, okay, this is quite evolving. And it's intriguing. I keep saying it's intriguing because no one knows anything. No one knows anything. It's because it's very similar to music, but it's not. It's radio. It's radio. It's basically radio being replaced. And so the main question and the whole question that everyone keeps trying to figure out is, and that I think Joe Budden is trying to figure out, what is a stream? Like the value of a stream. Streams are the analytic that determines how popular something is, how influential something is. You see a song and it's like, wow, that has 5 million streams. It must be very popular or good or just impactful. So we always hear streams when it comes to music, but there are streams when it comes to podcasts now. I think lately Spotify has let podcasters see how much streams they have per episode, per stuff like that. But for music, sorry if if you're clocked out, I understand. This is like just nerdy podcast music stuff that I'm really interested in right now. And it's so back to the stream with music. A song is counted as a stream if it's played for 30 seconds or more. So if it's a 3-minute song and if it's played for 30 seconds, that's all it needs. That's a one stream. But with podcasts now, a stream is, I think on Spotify, it's 60 seconds. Yes, on Spotify, I think it's either 30 or 60 seconds. That's it. 60 seconds of one episode is a stream. It's counted as a stream. And so with podcasts, it's kind of ridiculous because some of these podcasts, for example, Joe Budden Podcast is a 3-hour podcast most of the time. And some of these podcasts are 2 to 3 hours. I like to have an 1.5 hour podcast. Like these are like long podcasts. So it just feels disvalued when you just count it. You start with streams. You like try to value it with streams. Now, next question. The retention, audience retention. I think that's the term now. Watch time. When I'm looking at, I'm a practice squad when it comes to the podcast. I'm in the 5th division of so whenever I look at my podcast stats, I always look at watch time. Because it doesn't matter how many views I have on YouTube. I don't care about the views. Like 10 views, cool. I'd rather have 2 hours of watch time than 20 views. Because that's the currency now in the podcast and music. It's your attention. Yeah, it's cheesy, whatever, but that's just how the game is right now. Attention. That's why. Yeah, that's especially the entertainment. It's attention. It's like movies. Paying to watch a 3-hour movie. Paying to watch them. Yeah, so whatever. So with these long podcasts, it just feels disvalued when you take it down to a 30-second stream. Like, okay, yeah, I have a 3-hour podcast, but I want to see how many streams I have. So the watch time and your audience retention is definitely the most valuable stat. And so with the Joe Budden Podcast, with me, I listen to it. definitely 2 of the 3 hours at least. The last hour they kind of do some other like shout outs and kind of boring, but they were saying that they have their audience, which I can see their audience is just in it for the long run. And you know, when you compare that to the Michelle Obama, her new podcast, maybe people will listen to it for like let's say 2 minutes, and that's counted as a stream. So when you're comparing the Michelle Obama podcast and the Joe Budden podcast, they might have the same amount of streams, but the audience is way in tuned more into the Joe Budden podcast. So I know I'm talking in laps right now. Back to the question: what is the value of a stream? What is like the value? What is the number one stat when it comes to podcasts? I think it's watch time. But some of these people are more into the views or the streams. So I don't know. I see what Spotify does a kind of a weird job on how they do podcast analytics, because it will tell me how many people. I think it divided down to the main columns were starts, streams. Yeah, starts and streams. A start is just someone just playing your podcast. It can be like for a second or 3 hours. That's a start. But a stream is it has to be at least a minute long continuance. But you have to go into each episode to look at how much your average audience retention, your watch time. So Spotify doesn't really put an emphasis on that. You know, I think, yeah. You know, this is interesting. And that's like, I bring up the Michelle Obama podcast because that's the latest podcast right now that Spotify is trying to put up because, and, you know, some people have a weird view of that because they're basically just taking a celebrity and giving her a podcast and, you know, she's not a podcaster. Like, she's a rookie, you know, but she's a rookie podcaster that's gonna get professional stats. And I mean, that's just how it is sometimes. That's the game. But she'll probably won't have much audience retention starting out, just because no one like knows what she does. They might tune in for like 30 seconds or a minute. So when you compare that to like the Joe Budden podcast, called her Daddy podcast, where people actually just faithfully listen to the whole thing, that's when, you know, that's when you try to, that's the big deal right now. The value of podcasts right now. What is the value? It is interesting. It is interesting. I think, man, I just have a feeling it's going to be like it's heading toward $1 billion industry. Now, radio's done. Like, okay, for personal reference, like, I used to listen to music 24/7. I never listened to podcasts. Now I listen to, like, you know, educational podcasts that are taking away attention from me listening to music. I'm going in circles right now. Okay, man, this might be the whole episode. This might be the whole episode, but I'm so intrigued with the situation. Dang. So take from when I just compared, you know, the celebrity podcast to podcast. We compared it. Cool. Now let's compare podcast to music. Those are very similar situations. They're on the same platforms. Every music and podcasts are always together when it comes to Spotify, Apple, Tidal. They're all on the same platform. So you got these musicians making millions and millions and the hundreds of millions of these songs that are getting streams. So, let's say an album. Someone drops an album. A musician drops an album. Drake drops an album, an hour long. Let's not take Drake. Let's do like a mid-level. Mid-level. I don't know. I'm just trying to be. Okay, no. Let's say 50 Cent. He's a legend in the 2000s. He's not right now. 50 Cent drops an album. People will listen to it here and there, but it's not of importance. I'm just using him for this situation. 50 Cent drops an album. It's probably a 50-minute album. People will listen to it all the way through. That's a rare crowd of people listening to a 50 Cent album right now for 50 straight minutes. Meanwhile, you have these podcasters dropping 2 to 3 hour podcasts twice a week, and people are listening to that just as the same amount as one 50 Cent album a year. One 50 Cent album. So let's equate that to podcasts. Some of these podcasts are dropping 50 Cent style or 50 Cent impactful albums twice a week. Even more. Yeah, like especially the Joe Budden Podcast, Joe Rogan, they're dropping multiple 2 to 3 hour podcasts. That's 4 to 5 hours of content that is consumed. So when you compare that to music and you compare it to like that musician that drops a 50-minute album once a year, it's just like, and 50 Cent's making money. I don't know. See, that's the question right now. That's the question. That's the whole situation. Again, it's all up in the air. It's all up in the air. At first I was like, Joe Budden's crazy. But I thought he was crazy when he left Complex. But turns out it might have been the best move. And I think Joe Budden is actually dangerous in this situation because he's been screwed out of many music contracts. And then he has dipped sometimes from bad contracts. So he has an idea of situations. So yeah, it's very interesting what we might see. I don't know what else. There's a lot of stuff. There's so much drama going in. It's very interesting. I'm trying to think of there's so many other small aspects, but I don't know. That's the thing. I kind of want to know like what, the prime radio shows in the 90s. I remember growing up sports radio, Mike and Mike in the Morning in the 2000s were huge. I wonder how much they were making. I don't know. But I don't know. Maybe with music such a again, headache. The music industry is much more influential, I would say. And Hollywoody-ish, and the podcast world's kind of like mature and just not Hollywood-ish. I don't know. It's a lot of questions that no one really knows the answers to at like right now. So we're gonna see what Joe Budden does. With Joe Rogan coming on Spotify, I want to see what happens with that situation. It will definitely be interesting. And it's so confusing how Spotify exclusive podcasts, like why is that so important to Spotify? Hmm. I don't know. And why isn't Apple getting more podcasts? I always hear Spotify, all the podcasts. Hmm. I don't know. I don't know. It's that's all my thoughts right now. I know I just thoughted. Thoughts for 20 minutes. Hmm. 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 Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, so it's getting a little spicy. It's getting a little spicy. I like it. I like it. I like it. Um. Uh. Okay, somebody's texting me. Okay.